Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our April webinar, Know Your Rights. I'm Ann Massey Badmus, and I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to allow just a few more minutes, or well, maybe 1 minute for a few others to join, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for your patience. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome. I'm Ann Badmus, and welcome to our April webinar. So I know we get a lot of questions, particularly in these times because of all of the things that are going on with immigration and the changes that we see reported throughout the news. So we decided to have this webinar just to kind of give general information to allow you to understand some of the ways that you can protect yourself and your rights as immigrants. We won't be able to comment on specific cases or specific news reports that you might hear, but we'll try to answer your questions as best as possible. So there was a question about whether we will allow for questions, and the answer is yes. You can ask questions at any time. So there is a Q&A section to this platform, so feel free to enter your questions at any time. I will check back. I may be answering some of those questions throughout the presentation, but we'll also have time at the end of the presentation for you to ask questions. For confidentiality, this is a public platform, so we do suggest that you ask your questions in a general manner and try not to include personal details for your protection and privacy. Before I go further, I did need to do a sound check, so I just wanted to verify that you all can hear me. So if you can someone can just put into the chat that yes, you can hear. Okay, great, thank you so much for that. All right, so I also need to give you information or let you know that the information that we're providing in this presentation is going to be general. We're not going to certainly talk about specific situations, and each case is different. So if you have specific questions about your case that probably will require more detail, I would certainly suggest that you consult with us separately. All right, so I wanted to be sure that there's some background given to everyone with regard to our immigration system, or at least the agencies that are involved with immigration, the federal agencies. And so many of you probably certainly are aware that the Department of Homeland Security is the primary agency involved with managing our immigration system. And part of the Department of Homeland Security, there are 3 sub-agencies, and so it's important to know which agencies are involved in certain aspects of immigration. And in this case, for this presentation, in particular, you need to be aware of 2 agencies that you might not have run across. So we'll want to talk about those. So the first agency that I'll just kind of start from the right, actually. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So many of you are probably familiar with this agency, where it is responsible for deciding applications for immigration. So if you're applying for a green card, you're applying for citizenship, you're applying for any type of visa, or most types of visas, you will be applying to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. So this presentation really won't focus much on that agency, since we're not really going to be talking about applications. We're going to be talking about situations in your daily lives that you might run across, and how you might run across the other 2 agencies. So the other agency to the left is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this is what is typically known as the Immigration Police. So they're responsible for enforcement of certain immigration rules. In particular, if someone is not legally in the U.S. or undocumented, or if there's violation of their legal status, then ICE usually is the agency that will be involved in enforcing any of those rules related to deportation, um, detention, and even in some cases, even employer enforcement. And then the agency in the middle of this graphic is Customs and Border Protection, or CBP. So this is the agency that is responsible for enforcement at the border. And when I talk about the border, I mean also checkpoints and ports of entry, which can include airports, driving through at certain checkpoints from Canada or Mexico, ships coming into the U.S., any entries that are coming to the U.S., the Customs and Border Patrol is responsible for managing that and ensuring that there's compliance at the border. So I bring up this risk of deportation not because I'm aware of anyone needing that or is in that situation, but it is important to know that as immigrants, there is a risk of deportation unless you are a naturalized citizen, whether you're naturalized or born in the U.S. You are at risk of deportation. So what immigration status does that cover? Well, of course, it covers anyone who is undocumented that does not have legal status, whether they came in with legal status and lost it, or whether they came without legal status, that they are undocumented and considered to be at risk for deportation, or the more technical term is removal. Those with asylum or refugee status, or even some other form of protection like DACA or TPS, those are still, although they're legal status, you're still at risk for deportation if there are certain violations that occur within your immigration history. In addition, even those who have green cards, lawful permanent residents, in some cases can be removed for certain actions that they take. So it's important to know that as well. And then, of course, those who are coming or are coming to or in the U.S. With non-immigrant visas, they can be visitors, workers such as H-1B workers or any other kind of work visa category, students, anyone who does come in legally with permission can still be deported if there are violations that the government determines have occurred. Okay, there's someone saying it's not very loud, so hopefully you can hear me. I'm going to raise my voice a little bit and hopefully everyone can hear a little better there. So in addition, or I did want to be sure that even though, regardless of even though you may not be a U.S. citizen, anyone who is living in the U.S., regardless of their immigration status, still has basic constitutional rights. So that is pretty much what this presentation is about, being able to know your rights and being able to exercise them in certain circumstances as it relates to immigration. There are certainly a lot of other different types of constitutional rights or rights under our government, but this presentation really is limited to situations regarding immigration status you may come across. So let's talk briefly about know your rights at home. So in the case where you may, or ICE, for example, may approach you in your home, there are certain things that you need to know about in terms of what your rights are. So if immigration or ICE comes to your door, you do not need to immediately open the door. You can ask the person at your door, like you would for anyone that you don't know who's coming to visit you. You can ask them who they are, certainly, and you do not need to open that door unless they have identified themselves and they have actually presented a warrant signed by a judge. So technically, if ICE comes to your door or any other immigration officer comes to your door, they do need to identify themselves, and you're not required to let them in unless they actually have a warrant. And if they do have a warrant, or if you do voluntarily let them in, you still have the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. So if you want to invoke that right, you definitely need to state to those officers, I request my right to silence and an attorney, and you should remain silent and take the opportunity to contact your attorney. You also want to be sure that you do not sign anything unless you have advice of counsel. Um, and you're not required to sign anything until you will feel comfortable that you do want to sign it under advice as well. You're not required to show any, although it's advisable to keep your immigration documents with you, you're not required to show immigration documents. But you want to be careful to not say anything about if you're not a U.S. citizen, not to claim U.S. citizenship. You want to be careful not to invoke that, because that can be a real issue, even if you are a permanent resident. You do not want to state that you're a citizen. If they ask for searching without a warrant, you do not have to consent to search. If they do search anyway, do not resist, of course. Just note that that was done without your consent, noted in your own records so that you can present it later if you feel your rights have been violated in that sense. And we'll talk a little bit about more about what you can do if you feel your rights have been violated in this circumstance or any other circumstance as well. And of course, as I mentioned, you want to know someone who's a U.S. citizen, friend or family member, or more ideally an attorney that you can reach out to when this does happen, if immigration does approach you at your home. So this is an example of a warrant. So if immigration officer comes to your home or even your place of work with a warrant, this is what it would typically look like. You have a right to examine that warrant to be sure that it is indeed you, because sometimes they kind of come to your home and it may be someone else that they're looking for, or it could be that they've come to the wrong place. So you want to certainly examine the warrant to be sure that it is referencing you and to read exactly what they're allowed to do. So warrants will have specific information as to what the officer is allowed to do, whether they're allowed to search or just to question. So you want to be sure that you are compliant and they are compliant with the terms of that warrant. So now we'll just talk a little bit about knowing your rights at work. Sometimes immigration officers can come to work. It can be in a situation where it's ICE coming to there, or it could even be fraud and inspection officers who are coming to investigate regarding an immigration application that you might have pending or someone at your work has pending. So if immigration comes to your work illegally, most of the time, legally, they must either have a valid search warrant or they must have consent from your employer to enter areas that are private. So what I mean by that is like entering into people's offices or their workspaces. They're not allowed to do that, or even specifically question people unless they actually have a warrant that allows them to do that. Or if your employer says, yes, you can do that. However, they can enter, ICE in particular, can enter into public areas. So if you have a lobby or reception area or other outside of your office as well that are considered public, then they can enter those areas without a warrant or consent. But you have to understand, though, of course, that you still have the right, if you are questioned by any officer, you have the right to remain silent and to ask for or tell them that you want to contact your attorney before answering any questions. So again, if you choose to invoke that right, you need to tell them specifically that I request my right to silence and an attorney. And as in the situation where someone comes to your home, the same in your workplace, you do not want to sign anything that you do not agree to or you do not have counsel before signing. And then you also want to be able to reach out to a U.S. citizen friend, family member, or an attorney to let them to seek advice, or not seek advice from this citizen friend or a family attorney, but at least let them know what is happening with you. But from an attorney, you definitely want to seek their advice before signing anything. And then know your rights in public. So the reason I say this is because sometimes you can, whether it's a traffic stop or some other situation, maybe in a public forum where ICE comes or some immigration enforcement comes into the area, you need to know what your rights are in that situation as well. So if you are stopped, whether by immigration or police, you always want to um, first hear what they say, the question that they ask. But if they're wanting to stop you and keep you answering questions, then you could let them ask them if you're under arrest or free to leave. If they say that you're not under arrest, then you certainly are free to leave. If you choose to stay and speak further with them, which I don't advise, but if you do, then you want to, well, first of all, I don't advise to do that at all, but if they insist to continue asking questions, then you do want to again invoke your right to remain silent and say that you want to speak to an attorney before answering any further questions. You also have the right not to be fingerprinted unless you're being arrested, so they cannot ask you to start giving your biometrics or any fingerprints unless you actually are under arrest. If you are in a situation where you're in a traffic stop, police can search your car, but they can only search it if they have probable cause to believe that you've been involved in a crime. So this is not necessarily related to immigration. This is something that everyone should know when they are stopped by police. As far as being requested to search your car, they have to indicate why they're searching your car and why they believe that you are involved in some crime. They can't just request it. They can't just search your car without that probable cause. But oftentimes they will ask you to consent, but clearly you do not have to consent to that. If it is immigration related, and if you have valid immigration documents, as I'll talk a little bit more later, it is important that you carry any immigration documents with you. In particular, in the traffic situation, there are many states now that feel that they are also involved in immigration enforcement. So police stopping you for a traffic situation may even go further than to ask about your immigration status, although they're not technically a enforcement agency for immigration, to avoid detention by the fact that you have or that they suspect that you do not have legal status. It's a good idea if you do have legal status to have those documents with you so that you can show that you are having valid immigration status and should not be detained simply because of immigration status. And again, do not sign any paperwork related to your immigration status without speaking to an attorney first. Now, if under any of these circumstances or any other circumstances that you find yourself involved with an immigration situation and you feel like your rights have been violated, you should be sure to immediately write down what happened, write your thoughts on what happened, or ask someone who's a witness to it to write what happens. See if you can get specific details like the names of the officers, their badge numbers, and write exactly what was said and done, and then reach out to an attorney to report that violation or an immigrant rights organization. It's not to say that basically to do this is to ensure that if there is a violation of your rights, you can find out what kind of recourse that you have. And of course, certainly if there is a situation related to your immigration status where there is a removal hearing or some other hearing to determine whether you should remain in the U.S., you want to have that information available. Excuse me. So this is a question we get quite a bit. Quite a bit of question regarding travel. Is it a good time to travel? Is it safe to travel internationally? While we cannot give any guarantees in terms of what will happen when you travel internationally, it's just too unpredictable, and certainly there's no guarantees given by the government themselves as to what will happen or your ability to return after international travel. So we can't really address that or tell you even individually under your own circumstances whether you will never have any issue in returning from international travel. However, it is important to know what your rights are depending on your immigration status when you do return. So for those who are citizens, there are specific rights that we have as citizens. And when I talk about citizens' rights at the border, again, the border could be driving over, it could be coming to the U.S. by plane, by ship, cruise ship, whatever way that you're coming into the U.S. As a U.S. citizen, of course, you cannot be denied entry. So if you are a U.S. citizen, of course, you'll have to show your passport, which is always required for international travel. Then you cannot be denied entry, and you only need to answer questions about your identity and citizenship. So if there's questions about your passport, verifying, your name, your place of birth, whatever information is on your passport, that's certainly legitimate. But you can refuse to answer other questions that are not related to that. Even if they have questions about your travel, you do have the right not to answer it, although if you do so, you could, of course, be detained a little bit longer because of that. But they cannot refuse your entry into the U.S. simply because you're refusing to answer questions beyond your identity and citizenship. You can, again, speaking of questions, if they're asking about your religious beliefs or political opinions, you can certainly refuse to ask that as well. You more than likely, you can, however, they can search your luggage. They can search you personally if there is some cause to do so, not just because they wish to search you. So it's important that you ask what the reason is for the physical search other than your luggage. And then your phones and laptops can be searched. So they can request that. But they cannot typically ask you to or require you to unlock your phones and laptops, but to avoid that further detention or delay for your entry, I would suggest to not carry any phones or laptops that you do not feel comfortable having searched. So for example, for people who are attorneys, we don't want our laptops searched. If we keep client information on there, we would not want to keep client information on our laptops if we're going to be searched. So you have confidential information that you do not want to be searched. You probably do not want to carry that type of device with you when entering into the U.S. And that goes for your phones as well. For permanent residents, it's very similar to U.S. citizens, so you typically cannot be denied entry. You cannot have your green card revoked by any immigration officer when you come into the U.S. So oftentimes people do get nervous. Can I lose my green card? Can an officer at the airport say I'm no longer a permanent resident? And they cannot. For someone to lose their permanent residence or lose their green card, they would have to go before an immigration judge. So while an immigration officer might question your eligibility to continue to be a permanent resident, they cannot revoke that offhand. They have to allow you to enter the country. And if they want to have an immigration judge hear your case or consider whether or not you're eligible to maintain or keep your green card, then they have to send that over to the immigration court system, and then you'll be notified later if there is any court proceeding where you can come and defend whether or not you should keep your green card. So as a permanent resident, there's not the ability for any immigration officer, whether it's at the airport or anywhere in the country, on their own to say that your green card is not valid anymore, that you're no longer a permanent resident. So that being said, though, you should also you only need to answer questions about your identity and your permanent residence. So again, looking at your passport, your green card, just verifying that information. The officer can ask you that information, and you should answer those questions. But you still have the right to remain silent if they're asking questions beyond those, and you can refuse to answer questions about your religious beliefs or political beliefs, and you can refuse to answer other questions that aren't related to your identity and permanent residence. But again, be clear, you might be detained a little bit longer or kept a little bit longer. And so it could be rather inconvenient if that does happen, but you do have that right not to answer certain questions. Your luggage can be searched, and you personally can be searched if there's cause for that. And then your phones and laptops can be searched as well. So again, same um, situation as citizens, you want to avoid having any personal information that you don't want known to the officers. Then you can certainly carry devices that don't have that information there. And finally, for those who are not citizens or permanent residents, but you have a visa, whether any type of visa, so a student visa, H-1B, O-1, visitor visa, any of those visas. So your rights are less than those who are permanent residents and citizens, because you can be denied entry if you do not respond to questions or refuse to answer questions from the immigration officer. Even if there are questions which they should not ask, for example, about your religious or political opinions. You can be asked those questions, and depending on the officer, unfortunately, you can be denied entry. If you are denied entry, you usually will have, they usually will complete a form that will say why you were denied entry. They will give you that form, and they will require you to return or get the next flight back out of the U.S. So those things can happen, and oftentimes, even if they are not appropriate or they may be in violation of the First Amendment rights that you have as far as religious beliefs or permanent or political beliefs, opinions, that can happen. And of course, you might have some recourse once you're outside the U.S., but it would be very limited. You also, as with any other person trying to enter the U.S. as U.S. citizens or permanent residents, as a visitor, you can also have your luggage and person searched, as well as phones and laptops. So speaking of searches of devices and belongings, border agents, which again, the CBP can search your devices, electronic devices, without a warrant, whether you're a citizen or not. You can be asked to unlock your phone or laptop. In the case where you are a citizen or a permanent resident, you can refuse to provide that information. You can refuse to provide a password or unlock. If you are a visa holder, then your refusal can lead to denial of entry into the U.S. And in either case, they can the border agents unfortunately can seize your device and keep that device. So make sure that you are not storing sensitive data on the phone, minimizing the data that you do have on your phone. You may want to consider using another temporary type of device for traveling where you don't keep a lot of information, sensitive information. So keep that in mind. Well, now I do want to talk about the alien registration requirement, because we've gotten a lot of questions about that. This is a new requirement. Well, let me not say that. It's not a new requirement. It is a requirement that's been around quite some time, but it is now being more enforced. And so what is the alien registration requirement? It is part of the federal law that says anyone who is not a citizen or an alien who is in the United States for more than 30 days must register with the U.S. government. Now, this is typically happening all the time when someone is coming into the U.S. with a visa. So usually if you're coming in with any type of visa, you are being registered. You have biometrics that are taken by the CBP or even at the embassy. You might have to have that taken. So in that case, you would have already complied with the law. And so the document that you receive once you are registered depends upon your status. So, for example, if you have an H-1B visa, then your H-1B visa is your document showing that you're registered because you would have gone through that process of registration. And any other type of visa as well would apply. So, who does need to register? So anyone who is not a citizen and is 14 years old or older, um, if they did not get registered and fingerprinted when applying for a U.S. visa, that's pretty rare nowadays. Most all the except for children under the age of 14, um, everyone who gets a visa, U.S. visa, is registered and fingerprinted. If you if you did not get, but if for some reason you did not get registered, or if your child came with you and they were under age 14 when they came in, then they were not registered. So if they did not get registered and get fingerprinted and they remained in the U.S. for 30 days or more, then registration is required. So for children under age 14, if you have children under age 14, then you are responsible for getting them registered and fingerprinted within 30 days of their 14th birthday. So who is already registered? As I mentioned before, those who have entered with a visa, or in some cases a border crossing card if you're from Mexico. If you have a green card, then you are registered. If you were paroled into the U.S., then you are registered. If you were even in deportation or removal proceedings, then you are registered. If you have an employment authorization document, EAD, then you are registered. And if you have applied for a green card, then you are registered. So if you're in any of those categories, you do not need to register. But if you, for those who are not registered are those who enter the U.S. without inspection, meaning that they did not have a visa. So, for example, crossing either the northern or the southern border without actually meeting an immigration officer and being admitted and allowed to come in. Interestingly, if you're a Canadian visitor, oftentimes Canadian visitors come in through land. They drive in, maybe through Buffalo or some other entry point on the northern border, and typically or oftentimes they don't receive any registration document. They're just allowed to come in as a Canadian visitor. So if you do not have any evidence of receiving a registration document, such as an I-94, then you are probably not registered and you would need to register if you're going to be here for 30 days or more. Also, if you've applied for certain other types of immigration benefits, like if you're on TPS or DACA, potentially if you did not get fingerprinted when you received those benefits, then you would need to be registered. In most cases, even those statuses do go through a fingerprinting or registration, so that might not be the case. But if you do not recall whether you received a biometrics appointment and were actually fingerprinted, then you may need to look into registering and speak with an attorney to determine whether you need to register. So what happens, or what is the process for registration? So if you are subject to registration, the process is online. So you can go to the website I have on this slide. But note that if you do register, it does not mean it gives you any legal status. It is not an extension of your status in the U.S. It is not a work permit. It does not give you any protection from deportation. It really is a way for the government to know who's in the U.S. and who is subject to deportation. And with this registration process, it will identify you to the government and give the government an opportunity to determine whether or not you actually are legal in the U.S. and whether you are subject to removal or deportation. So know that this is not a registration to give you any permanent or legal status in the U.S. Now, importantly for everyone, regardless of whether you need to register under this new process or not, or whether you already are registered, it's very important to know that you do need to carry proof of your registration. So what is proof of your registration? Well, if you have a green card, then you need to carry your green card with you at all times, just as you would carry a driver's license, for example. So if you're driving, you need to have your green card with you. If you're at work, you need to have your green card with you wherever you are. I know a lot of people with green cards kind of hesitant to carry that because they feel concerned if it's lost or anything like that. But it is the rule or the law that you carry your green card with you. If you are here on a visa, H-1B visa or any other type of visa, student visa, you need to keep your documentation of that, which could be your visa and your passport showing you have a visa, your I-20 if you're a student, if you're an H-1B worker and your visa has expired and you might have a approval notice to extend, you want to carry that approval notice with you. Anything to prove that you're here legally, you want to be sure that you have that on your person. And for many reasons, but one reason is that if you do not carry that on your person and it's determined, let's say an immigration officer does um, come up to you and ask you questions and want to determine whether or not you're a permanent resident, have a green card, and you don't have your, and you say, I have a green card and you don't have that on your person, they could actually, just for the fact that you did not have that on your person, they could actually consider that bring charges against you, saying that you did not keep your green card on your person, and therefore you've committed a misdemeanor and you're subject to a fine up to $5,000 or 30 days in jail or both. So it can be very serious if it's determined that you are not carrying your green card or any other proof of your registration with you. Another important point that's always been something that attorneys have advised their clients to do, and the USCIS has always advised anyone who is not a citizen in the U.S., you must notify the USCIS of any address change. So if you change address, you need to be sure that within 10 days of changing your address, you update the USCIS, and you can do that easily by going to the USCIS website that I have listed here, or if you have an online account through any immigration process that you've been through, you can go and update your address there. If you fail to update your address, it also can result in penalties, including a fine up to $5,000, up to 30 days in jail, or both. So very important to keep your address updated at all times. So those are kind of the summary of the rights that I wanted to address. And so I want to give enough time for questions. I see we have some questions. But before we go on to questions, I also want to caution people to be sure that if you are seeking advice about your immigration application or any immigration situation you're in, be careful that you're asking the right people about that advice. So really only those who are either attorneys or their accredited representatives that have been certified by the government are really allowed to give you advice. So if someone is claiming that they can help you for a fee, and they are not an attorney or an accredited representative, then that is actually in violation of law, and you want to be careful not to be involved or seek that kind of assistance from people who are not lawyers, who are, even if they're saying they're interpreters or tax preparers or those types of things, they're really not authorized to provide immigration services, even if they think I'm just filling out your forms, that sort of thing, because even filling out an immigration form is pretty much giving legal advice, unless you're doing it yourself. Of course, if you're doing it for yourself, it's fine. But if you are seeking assistance, that person assisting you and helping you with doing those things must be authorized to do so. And they can only be authorized if they're an attorney or an accredited representative. The last right I wanted to talk about is the right to sue. So as I mentioned earlier, if you feel like your rights have been violated, and there are many different constitutional rights that you have, but in the context of even immigration, if you feel like your rights have been violated, there is, even if you are not a citizen, you do have the right to sue in those cases. So you want to seek out legal assistance to determine whether there is a right for you to sue the government or any person that may have violated your rights, such as searching you unlawfully, racial profiling, discrimination, denial of due process. That's something we're hearing a lot about in the news about due process and not being given the opportunity to defend yourself before you are um, punished by the government. Also violations at any interactions with law enforcement or immigration officers. So note those things if those things happen or you feel those things have happened to you. Note those details and reach out to an attorney who can help you to determine whether you have what we call a cause of action against whoever violated your rights. And here's some resources, and I will send this presentation to all who attended and all who registered, but I wanted to make sure you had some resources here where you can get more information generally about certain rights and organizations who are advocates in particular for immigrants who oftentimes will even help to pursue legal action when there's violations of rights as well. So check out those resources. So now we'll go to questions. I do see we have a few questions here. So I'm going to go in order, and you all have been really good about putting the questions in the Q&A section. So thank you so much for putting it there. So the question is, can a Canadian citizen who has a green card by marriage with a prior DUI from 2018 cross the border by land for 1 day and return to the US without issue? So that's a very specific question, and I certainly understand it. Technically, you should be allowed to come into the US as a green card holder, even if you have previous criminal issues or criminal arrest. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, no one at the border has the ability to deny you entry as a green card holder or deny whether you're eligible for maintaining your green, or whether your green card is still valid or your permanent residence is still valid. So if there is a question or the government, the officer at the border questions you and they notice that you did have a previous DUI, of course, you can answer that. They may ask you to confirm that, but they cannot say you cannot enter because of a DUI. So, of course, again, as I said earlier, there's no guarantees, but by law, you should be permitted to enter. And if the officer wants to pursue the issue of the DUI further and thinking that has any bearing on your permanent residence and whether you should be deported or not, they would have to refer that to an immigration judge and give you the due process to be able to prove whether or not you can keep your green card. So just by leaving and coming back with a green card and having that kind of record, the immigration officer should not deny you entry. So the next question is for green card applicants. Have you seen an increased rate of requests for evidence, RFEs, or denials when using AB1 premium processing? We always use almost 100% use premium processing. So I don't know, I can't note any difference between premium processing and regular processing. But as far as increased rate, I haven't noticed that yet. It's a little early since the current administration just came in January. It could happen. I do note that it did seem to be, or there was a higher rate of denial under the previous Trump administration. So it remains to be seen, but currently I don't know that increase. I don't know that increase has happened. Next question is, are naturalized U.S. citizens required to carry documents? No, U.S. citizens are not at this point required to carry any proof of citizenship, including naturalized citizens. So although some feel like it's a good idea to have some proof of that, just in case there is a situation where ICE does come maybe to your workplace and starts to assume everyone does not have legal status. So practically, it might be a good idea to try to have some proof, although the only proof that I can consider that you would have as a naturalized citizen would be either your certificate of naturalization or your passport, and that most people don't want to carry that sort of thing around. Even those who are born in the U.S. could carry their birth certificates around, but most people don't do that. So fortunately, right now, there's not any requirement to carry any particular documents to prove your citizenship. There's a question about what about a LPR with a prior DUI. I'm thinking that might be related to the previous question, but I'm not quite clear on what the question is. But if you're, I'm assuming, if you want to clarify that, if you could, I'll try to answer that. Next is, can they detain permanent residents at the airport until they see a judge? No, they will not do that, because basically seeing a judge would take a very long time. What happens is, if they believe that you're not, that you should no longer, or your permanent residence should be revoked, then they will have to admit you, and then ICE will have to send you a notice to appear before a judge. So the notice to appear before a judge will give you a time and date. And usually that date is very, very far off. It's, it could be a year before you're asked to see a judge. Those kinds of cases where they're trying to revoke a permanent resident, unless it's because of a very serious crime, usually they will put that sort of at the back of the line in terms of having a hearing. So they cannot. Now, what's really important for permanent residents to know, especially those who have had maybe extended trips outside the US, sometimes you will get officers at the airport who try to forcefully encourage you to basically give up your, or abandon your green card. So they might put before you what's called an I-407 form that says sign this. That way you don't have to go see a judge. What you can do is just sign this form, and then you no longer have your permanent residence, but at least you don't have to go see a judge. Well, it's better to go see a judge than to voluntarily give up your green card, unless you absolutely do not want your green card yourself. But if you still want to maintain your permanent residence, you do not want to voluntarily, so-called voluntarily, sign that form, because if you do, even if you feel like it was done under duress, you were nervous, you felt pressured to do it, that will not be an excuse. You will not be able to get your green card back, or have that situation reversed. And in that case, if you want to become a permanent resident, again, you will have to go through the same process as anyone else who applies for permanent residence. Next question is, are you registered if you entered with a Nexus card at the Canadian border? Honestly, I don't know exactly. I would think that you would be. It's something I have to look into a little further, but with the Nexus card, it does seem to be a registration process. So I will, if you want to email me that question, I will get back to you on that. Is it legal for you to use your phone to videotape your interaction with any law officer? It's probably more of a question of someone who practices in a different area of law, but I would say that you could try to videotape it if the officer confronts you about it and tries to take it. I probably would not enter into any kind of confrontation about that. But certainly there is a legal right to use your phone to videotape. But I cannot really specifically answer any law enforcement situation where you don't have that right. Next question, and it looks like the last question, unless there's some more questions anyone else wants to answer or ask. There are your rights at home. You said one does not need to open the door unless a warrant is provided. Is opening the door to view the warrant or get identification considering opening the door, if that's the only way to do it? Yeah, yes, it can be, unless you can, for example, if you have one of those locks, that chain locks, you can slightly open the door, not fully open it to get that, get a copy to see the warrant, or they can slide it under your door. Yes, but if you fully open the door, then yes, you are allowing them in. So you'll try to find a way to see that warrant You could even ask them, well, I was going to say maybe they could send you a photo of it, but you don't necessarily want to have to give them your number. So you might just figure out a way to have them slide it under your door or slightly open the door without unlocking the door. So if you have a chain lock or something, that might be the best circumstance. One more question, can previous immigration violation affect green card holders from re-entry? That depends on the violation. So, but normally if you had an immigration violation and you got your green card after that violation, then normally it would not, well, let me backtrack. Certainly, the immigration violation in itself cannot keep you from entering the U.S. So, as I mentioned, as a green card holder, the immigration officer cannot deny you entry, even if they note that there was an immigration violation, and even if they think that could affect your ability to keep your green card. So they can't keep you from re-entering. Now, they can note that violation and decide to refer it over to an immigration judge. So you could receive a notice to appear where they are seeking to remove you because of that immigration violation. But it really just depends on what that violation is. In most cases, they were already aware of the violation and they already approved your green card regardless of that violation. So it should not be an issue even for removal or deportation, but certainly it would not affect your ability to re-enter the U.S. because the officer just does not have the authority to refuse your entry because of that. I think that's all the questions see so far. I'll give 1 minute for any other questions before we go on. Before I end, though, again, I want to emphasize that the information provided here it has been very general. Even the responses to questions, are based on these general situations. If you feel that your case needs further evaluation, then please do reach out to us for a consultation so we can fully look at your situation and give you tailored advice as well. And so to do that, you can email us at immigration@badmuslaw.com or go to our website and fill out our contact us form for a consultation. I believe if there are no further questions, I want to thank everyone for attending, and we will be sending a copy of this presentation as well as a recording, and please feel free to share. We'll also have this on YouTube as well, so feel free to review it and share with your network as well. Thank you and have a great day.